Being a pediatrician had always been my dream, but sometimes life has a way of turning even our proudest achievements into sources of pain. My father, Robert Miller, has spent my entire life blaming me for ruining his marriage, even before I was born. The latest evidence of his resentment? He refused to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, choosing instead to make it clear that he wanted to save that honor for his real daughter, my sister Jessica. The story of how this all began takes us back to when Jessica was young. She was born when our parents were barely out of college themselves, and for years, it was just the three of them. They were like a perfectly balanced triangle, mom and dad building their careers while raising Jessica alongside them. Mom worked her way up in hospital administration, while dad established himself in commercial real estate. They poured all their ambition and dreams into Jessica, grooming her to follow in their footsteps of business success. Looking at old photos from those days, you can see their shared drive for success in every frame. Family vacations were combined with business trips, and dinner conversations revolved around investment strategies and market trends. Jessica absorbed it all like a sponge, eventually channeling that business acumen into founding her own successful tech startup. But life has a way of disrupting even the most carefully laid plans. The cracks in their perfect triangle began to show long before I entered the picture. Both my parents were so consumed by their careers that their relationship started to suffer. Dad's busy schedule managing his growing real estate portfolio and Mom's long hours at the hospital meant their time together became increasingly rare. Those romantic dinner dates they used to have, replaced by quick takeout meals between meetings. Their weekend getaways, sacrificed to client calls and emergency consultations. That's when Dad's insecurities began to surface. In his mind, Mom's dedication to her hospital work transformed from admirable ambition to suspicious behavior. The reality was simple. She was exactly where she always said she was, balancing her administrative duties with caring for Jessica and maintaining our home. I can only imagine how exhausting it must have been for her, carrying all those responsibilities while my father's trust in her slowly eroded. The discovery. The truth about my existence came to light in the most dramatic way possible. Mom collapsed at her desk one afternoon, causing immediate panic throughout the hospital where she worked. Her colleagues, many of whom would later become my own mentors in medical school, rushed her to the emergency room, fearing the worst. But the diagnosis wasn't exhaustion or illness, as everyone had assumed. Instead, the doctors discovered she was 3 months pregnant with me. The irony doesn't escape me now, as a pediatrician myself, how my mother, someone who spent her days surrounded by medical professionals, hadn't noticed her own pregnancy. Between managing hospital operations, caring for Jessica, and trying to salvage her struggling marriage, the early signs of my existence had slipped by unnoticed. As I now tell my own patients' mothers during their prenatal consultations, it happens more often than people think, especially during times of high stress. But my father's reaction to the news was far from the typical surprised but happy response I witness in my pediatric practice. When he arrived at the hospital, his face didn't show concern for my mother or excitement about the unexpected blessing. Instead, his expression hardened with suspicion and anger. Standing in that sterile hospital corridor, he declared with cold certainty that I couldn't possibly be his. "It's impossible," he said to Mom in front of her shocked colleagues. "We barely see each other. How convenient that this happens now, when I'm barely home." The argument that ensued in that hospital corridor would set the tone for my entire existence. Mom, still wearing her hospital gown and connected to monitoring equipment, defended herself through tears. "How dare you, Robert? How dare you accuse me of this? I've done nothing but work and take care of our family." That night, Dad packed his bags and moved out, leaving Mom and Jessica alone in their big house. His ultimatum was clear. He wouldn't return until there was proof that I was his child. Looking back now, as someone who regularly deals with family dynamics in my practice, I can see how that moment fractured our family in ways that would never fully heal. The DNA results. The DNA test results did what science does best: revealed the undeniable truth. I was, without question, Robert Miller's daughter. I've seen enough medical test results in my career now to appreciate the irony of how a simple genetic test can completely upend someone's world. When the results came in, my paternal grandparents were livid with their son. I still remember the stories Mom and Jessica told me about how Grandma and Grandpa Miller stormed into Dad's temporary apartment, waving the test results like a banner of his shame. "How could you do this to Carol?" Grandma reportedly screamed at him. "She's been nothing but loyal, working herself to exhaustion, managing both her career and your home. And this is how you repay her? By abandoning her while she's carrying your child?" Dad had no choice but to come crawling back home. But his return didn't bring the fairy tale reconciliation you might expect. Mom, who by then had developed the steel spine I would later inherit, laid down new terms for their marriage. Standing in our kitchen, still showing barely any signs of pregnancy, she made her position clear. "Things will be different now, Robert," she told him, her voice carrying the same authority she used in hospital board meetings. "I've been carrying this family's burden alone for too long. Either you step up and become a true partner, or I'm done. I won't raise another child while you play the suspicious, absent husband." The new normal. Dad agreed to Mom's terms, but his compliance came with a price, one that I would end up paying for the rest of my life. While he took on more responsibilities around the house and made a show of being more present, he channeled all his resentment toward the unborn baby who had forced this change, me. Even before I took my first breath, I had become the scapegoat for everything he saw as wrong in his marriage. Now, as a pediatrician who specializes in family dynamics and child development, I can clinically understand how a parent might project their marital problems onto a child. But living it? That's a different kind of pain entirely. As Jessica later told me, Dad's behavior changed drastically after he moved back in. He would attend all the prenatal appointments with Mom, but his presence felt more like a guard checking for inconsistencies than a supportive husband. He went through the motions of preparing for my arrival, but there was no joy in his actions, no excited planning for his new daughter's future. Early years. Growing up as a doctor's daughter who was simultaneously unwanted by her father creates a special kind of cognitive dissonance. Dad maintained two distinct personalities: the charming real estate mogul who could win over any client, and the cold, distant father I knew behind closed doors. In public settings, he'd play his part perfectly, placing a hand on my shoulder during family photos or asking about my day when others were within earshot. But the moment we were alone, or just with Mom and Jessica, that facade would crumble. I still remember crying in my room after scraping my knee in our backyard. I must have been around 5. While Mom was working a late shift at the hospital, Dad was in his home office. My cries echoed through the house, but he never came to check on me. It was Jessica, 12 years my senior, who rushed in with band-aids and comforting words. "Shh, Sarah. It's okay. Look, we'll clean it up and make it all better." Even then, she was practicing the kind of care I would later provide to my own patients. "Why doesn't Daddy come when I cry?" I remember asking her. Jessica's face clouded over, the way it always did when confronted with Dad's behavior toward me. Sometimes grown youths don't know how to show love properly," she answered, carefully applying the bandage. "But that's why you have me and Mom. And we love you enough for everyone." School years. As I grew older, I discovered that academic excellence was the only currency that held any value with Dad. Every A+ on my report card, every academic award, became a desperate attempt to win even a moment of his approval. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that would later serve me well in medical school, but at the time, it was driven by a child's desperate need for paternal recognition. "Look, Dad, I got the highest score in biology," I would announce, holding up my test paper like an offering. He would glance up from his real estate portfolios, give a cursory nod, and mutter something like, "That's fine. Jessica was already running her first website at your age." The comparison to Jessica was constant, though never in her presence. It's ironic now. I ended up becoming a doctor, dedicating my life to healing children, while he remained fixated on Jessica's business acumen as the only measure of success. College years and career path. My decision to apply to Stanford Medical School was met with the kind of reaction that perfectly encapsulated my relationship with Dad. While Mom was ecstatic, organizing a small celebration dinner at home, Dad's response was predictably dismissive. "Medical school?" He scoffed over his dinner plate. "All that time and money just to be a pediatrician?" Jessica was already securing her first round of venture capital funding at your age. I can still feel the sting of those words, even now as I sit in my own pediatric practice. "Actually, Dad," I counted, my voice steadier than I felt, "I received a full academic scholarship. And pediatricians do more than you think. We save lives." But he just shrugged, turning his attention back to his phone, where he was probably checking Jessica's company's latest stock prices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, pursuing a career dedicated to helping children, while my own father couldn't even show basic interest in my achievements. Meeting Michael. Everything changed when I met Michael Chen 3 years ago. He walked into a hospital fundraiser where I was representing our pediatric department, and unlike my father, he was immediately interested in hearing about my work with children. Standing there in his well-fitted suit, he listened intently as I described our latest initiative to provide free healthcare to underprivileged kids. "That's incredible," he said, his eyes showing genuine admiration. "You're literally changing lives every day." Michael, a software engineer who created educational apps for children, understood the value of what I did in a way my father never had. Our connection was immediate and deep, based on a shared commitment to making children's lives better, albeit through different means. When I introduced him to my family, the dynamic was telling. Mom and Jessica welcomed him warmly, but Dad's reaction was characteristically cold. During family dinners, Michael would try to engage Dad in conversation about my work at the clinic, only to be met with brief, disinterested responses. "You know," Dad would say, gesturing towards Jessica, "my other daughter's tech company just expanded into 3 new markets." Michael's response was always the same. A polite nod followed by turning back to me with a supportive smile. Later, he would hold me as I processed these interactions, providing the understanding and validation I had craved from my father for so long. The proposal and wedding planning. When Michael proposed, it wasn't just a promise of marriage. It was a promise of the family I'd always wanted. After accepting the beautiful engagement ring, my thoughts naturally turned to wedding planning. We were both successful in our careers. Me with my established pediatric practice, and Michael with his educational software company, which meant we could afford the wedding of our dreams. The first major decision was, of course, who would walk me down the aisle. Mom, ever hopeful about family reconciliation, kept insisting I should ask Dad. "Sarah, honey," she said during one of our wedding planning sessions at my apartment, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I know things have been difficult with your father, but maybe this could be a chance to heal things?" I sat there in my living room, surrounded by wedding magazines and color swatches, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach whenever Dad became the topic of conversation. "Mom, I've been thinking about asking Uncle James instead." The moment those words left my mouth, I could see Mom's face fall. But Sarah, he's your father. What will people think if your uncle walks you down the aisle when your father is right there? Deep down, I knew she was worried about appearances, about the whispers and raised eyebrows from extended family. But I was thinking about Uncle James, Mom's brother, who had attended every one of my medical school graduations, who had celebrated each milestone in my career, who had shown me what genuine paternal love could look like. The confrontation. Still, I gave in to Mom's wishes and agreed to ask Dad. I drove to his office one afternoon after finishing my rounds at the hospital, my white coat still on because I hadn't had time to change. I found him sitting behind his massive desk, surrounded by property development plans and market analysis reports. "Dad," I started, my heart racing despite years of learning to stay calm in emergency situations. "I wanted to ask you something about the wedding." He barely looked up from his computer screen. "Make it quick, Sarah. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Would you? Would you walk me down the aisle?" The silence that followed felt longer than any tense moment I'd experienced in the emergency room. Finally, he looked at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Was it disgust? The rejection? "Walk you down the aisle?" Dad's voice was cold, clinical, ironically similar to how I delivered difficult diagnoses, except there was no compassion in his tone. "I hadn't even considered it. You're not really my daughter anyway. Not in the ways that matter." Despite my years of medical training, despite having learned to maintain composure in the most stressful situations, those words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in his office, still in my white coat, with my hospital ID badge clipped to my pocket, a symbol of everything I'd achieved despite his lack of support. "Mom thought it would be appropriate," I managed to say, my professional mask slipping into place like it did during difficult patient consultations. He leaned back in his leather chair, his next words delivered with the same casual cruelty I'd known all my life. "The only daughter I'd ever want to walk down the aisle is Jessica." He paused, a bitter smile crossing his face. "Though we both know she's too smart to bother with traditional marriage nonsense." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica, his real daughter, had chosen to remain single, focusing on her tech empire, while I, the unwanted one, was building both a successful medical career and a loving marriage. As a doctor, I understood the concept of emotional trauma, but understanding it clinically did nothing to lessen the pain of experiencing it firsthand. The alternative plan. That evening, I drove straight to Uncle James' house. I found him in his garden, tending to his prized roses, the same roses he'd often bring to my office to brighten up my pediatric patients' days. When I told him about Dad's response, his hands stilled on the pruning shears. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm with the paternal affection I'd never received from Dad, "I would be honored to walk you down the aisle. Your patients call you their angel doctor. It's about time someone treated you like the angel you are." I broke down then, letting out years of pent-up pain. Uncle James held me, his gardening gloves still on, dirt and all, not caring that my tears were staining his shirt. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. And I chose you as my daughter the day you were born." The wedding day. On my wedding day, the hospital's pediatric ward sent a handmade card signed by all my young patients. It sat proudly on the gift table, right next to the expensive presents from Jessica's tech industry connections. The contrast between these gifts seemed to perfectly symbolize the different worlds within our family. The pre-wedding celebration the night before had been particularly revealing. Dad had chosen that moment to present Jessica with a brand new Tesla, complete with a bow on top. For my real daughter, he'd announced to the gathered family, "who's made me proud with every business decision she's made." Then, almost as an afterthought, he'd handed me a box containing a basic coffee maker, the kind you might grab last minute from a department store. Uncle James, watching this scene unfold, had squeezed my hand supportively. Hours later, he was the one standing with me at the entrance of the church, looking handsome in his tuxedo. "Ready, Dr. Miller?" he asked with a warm smile, using my professional title with the pride my father never showed. Michael waited at the altar, his face lighting up as Uncle James and I began our walk. I could see Dad in the family section, his expression blank, while Mom and Jessica sat nearby with tears of joy. The contrast between Dad's indifference and everyone else's happiness was stark, but for once, it didn't hurt as much as it used to. During the reception, Dad maintained his distance from both Michael and me, barely acknowledging us during the family photos. He positioned himself as far from us as possible while still technically being in the frame, a physical representation of our emotional distance that would be forever captured in our wedding album. Michael, observing Dad's behavior throughout the day, handled it with the same quiet strength I'd come to rely on. When we took to the dance floor for our first dance as husband and wife, he whispered, "You know what's funny? He thinks he's punishing you by staying away, but he's only punishing himself. He'll never know what an amazing daughter, doctor, and now wife he's missing out on." The aftermath. Word about Dad's behavior spread through our family circle like a diagnosis through a hospital ward, quick and impossible to contain. I'm not sure who shared the details first, perhaps Mom, Jessica, or Uncle James. But soon everyone knew how he had refused to walk me down the aisle and his continued pattern of rejection. The fallout was significant. Family members began openly criticizing him, their comments as sharp as surgical instruments. "Congratulations on proving what a terrible father you are," one aunt reportedly told him at a family gathering. Others started treating him with the same coldness he'd shown me all these years. Last week, my phone lit up with Dad's number, a rare occurrence that usually meant something was wrong. His voicemails carried an unfamiliar tone of desperation. "Sarah, I need you to tell everyone that I was always there for you, the best I could be," he pleaded. "Tell them you chose not to have me walk you down the aisle. People are. They're treating me differently now." As a pediatrician, I often counsel parents about taking responsibility for their actions and their impact on children. The irony of my father's request wasn't lost on me. After several attempts to convince me, he finally reached out again today, this time with a different approach. "This is affecting my relationship with Jessica too," he said, his voice tense. "What if she decides to get married one day and doesn't want me to walk her down the aisle either? Her tantrum about this is ruining everything." The confrontation. Standing in my medical office, surrounded by children's drawings from grateful patients, I felt a surge of professional calm, the kind I use when delivering difficult news to parents. "Dad," I said firmly, "as a doctor, I've learned that healing can't begin until we acknowledge the wound. You've made it clear throughout my life that you don't see me as your daughter. You don't get to demand my help now that your actions have consequences." Recent developments. Since that confrontation, things have shifted dramatically in our family dynamic. My medical perspective has helped me understand that sometimes the healthiest choice is to maintain appropriate boundaries, just as I advise parents in my practice about setting limits with their children. Mom and I had a heart-to-heart in my office after hours, surrounded by the cheerful decorations I keep for my young patients. "Sarah," she said, tears in her eyes as she looked at the wall of thank you cards from families I'd helped, "I should have protected you more. Watching you become this amazing doctor, helping so many children. I'm sorry I didn't stand up to your father sooner." Jessica's response to everything has been even more dramatic. 4 months ago, she made the decision to move her tech company's headquarters to a new city, effectively cutting all ties with Dad. "I can't keep watching him treat my brilliant sister, who literally saves children's lives, like she's nothing," she told me over video chat. I've carried this guilt about his preferential treatment for too long. The present. These days, my focus remains where it should be, on my pediatric practice and my life with Michael. The walls of my office are covered with drawings from my patients, each one a reminder that I've created something meaningful despite, or perhaps because of, my father's rejection. It's interesting. As a pediatrician, I often tell parents that children thrive when they're shown consistent love and support. My father's treatment taught me exactly what not to do, making me more attuned to the emotional needs of my young patients and their families. I no longer attend family events where Dad might be present, and he does the same. The weight of his disapproval, which once felt as heavy as my medical textbooks during residency, has finally lifted. In its place is a sense of peace that comes from accepting that sometimes the best treatment plan is to remove yourself from what causes you harm. Michael often says I'm the strongest person he knows, watching me balance my demanding medical career with personal growth. You turned pain into purpose, he tells me, referring to how I've channeled my experiences into being a better doctor for my young patients. In the end, my father's rejection led me to build something he never could have given me, a life filled with purpose, healing, and genuine love. Every day in my pediatric practice, I get to be the kind of supportive, nurturing presence that I needed as a child. And somehow, that feels like the best kind of victory.